Almost everything in your home probably traveled thousands of miles inside a steel box. Your shoes, your phone charger, your coffee machine, and maybe even the camera filming this video. It crossed oceans without you noticing. It moved through ports you will never visit, rode on trains you will never see, and passed through a global system so efficient it became invisible. But before this object existed, global trade was a mess. Cargo was slow to load, expensive to move, easy to steal, and painfully difficult to track. Then one idea changed all of it. Not a new engine, not a faster ship, and not a new fuel, but a box. And once that box appeared, the world had to rebuild itself around it. That is what makes the shipping container one of the most important everyday objects ever created. You have probably seen shipping containers your entire life. They sit on cargo ships, behind trucks, in rail yards, behind warehouses, and sometimes even repurposed into homes and cafes. They are everywhere, and that is exactly why they disappear. The more familiar an object becomes, the less important it seems. The container looks like industrial background noise. It is just corrugated steel, locking bars, corner posts, dents, rust, faded paint, and serial numbers. Nothing about it looks revolutionary. And yet this plain steel box helped reorganize the modern world. Because the container is not important for what it is important for what it allows. A shipping container can move between ship, truck, and train without unloading the cargo inside. That sounds simple now, but for most of history, it was not how trade worked. For most of human history, goods moved as individual pieces. Crates, sacks, barrels, machines, furniture, textiles, food, and tools were all handled separately. Every transfer meant labor. Every labor step meant delay, and every delay meant cost. That made distance expensive, and it made trade far slower and more fragile than most people imagine. Today, the modern world still depends on maritime trade. Most goods traded around the world by volume still travel by sea, and the container remains one of the key reasons that system works at scale. That is the real power of the shipping container. It did not just help move cargo, but standardized movement itself. To understand why that mattered, you have to picture the world before containerization. Imagine a port in the early 20th century, long before steel boxes were stacked in neat rows. Not the geometric order of the modern container terminal. Think instead of chaos. Piers were crowded with crates, sacks, ropes, barrels, pallets, and handwritten manifests. Longshore workers moved cargo by hand, piece by piece, often in brutal conditions. A single ship might carry thousands of separate items from hundreds of different shippers. Coffee in sacks, soap in boxes, steel drums, fabric rolls, machine parts, and wooden crates might all be packed together. Each cargo type had to be handled differently. Each piece had to be counted, stored, protected, moved, and loaded again. If cargo changed from truck to warehouse, to dock to ship to rail, it was touched again and again. Ports were not just transportation hubs, but giant friction machines. This system was expensive. It was slow, vulnerable to theft, exposed to weather, and filled with paperwork mistakes. And worst of all, ships spent enormous amounts of time standing still. That mattered because ships only make money when they are moving. Before containerization, shipping had a speed problem that had nothing to do with engines. The real bottleneck was the port itself. The greatest delays happened while cargo was being loaded and unloaded. A ship could spend days sitting at the dock while labor crews moved goods one item at a time. So the real challenge was not inventing a stronger ship. It was inventing a system that removed friction from the transfer itself. And that required someone who could look at a port and see waste everywhere. That person was Malcolm McLean. McLean was not a famous admiral or naval engineer. He was a trucking entrepreneur. He had built a trucking business and understood something traditional shipping operators often ignored. Delays were not just annoying, but direct attacks on profit. As the story is often told, McLean had watched truck cargo being unloaded piece by piece at ports and wondered why the whole load could not move as one unit. Why unpack and repack the same goods again and again just because they changed vehicles? That question sounds obvious now. At the time, it was radical. The shipping industry was built around old habits, old labor systems, old terminal layouts, and old business models. Many people believed containerization was unrealistic or had little future. But McLean was willing to bet everything on it. He sold his trucking stake, acquired a shipping company, and pushed toward a new intermodal model. In 1956, a converted tanker called the Ideal X left Port Newark for Houston, carrying 58 containers. That voyage is widely treated as the commercial birth of modern container shipping. The importance of that trip was not that nobody had ever moved large cargo units before. The importance was that McLean proved the business case. The ship could be loaded far faster than under the old system. The cargo stayed sealed, handling costs dropped, and the route made money. That was the moment the idea stopped sounding theoretical. It became a system other companies could no longer ignore. But there was still a major obstacle. A container only changes the world if everyone agrees on what a container actually is. How long should it be? How wide should it be? How high, how strong, and how should it be lifted? How should it lock into place on a truck, a rail car, or a ship? How should it stack safely in a storm or on a moving vessel? This is where standardization becomes the hidden hero of the story. Without shared standards, a container is just a private box. With standards, it becomes infrastructure. It becomes a global platform that different companies, ports, and transport systems can all use together. That is why the shipping container was more than clever packaging. It became the architecture of cargo itself. Once containerization proved it could save time and money, its effects spread rapidly. But the world could not adopt it without changing everything around it. Ports had to reinvent themselves. Old breakbolt docks had been designed for labor-intensive cargo handling, not steel boxes moved by giant cranes. Container ports needed deep berths. They needed wider yards, new cranes, more storage space, truck access, rail connections, and new scheduling systems. The port was no longer just a waterfront. It was becoming a machine. That shift reshaped cities. Some old ports declined because they could not physically adapt, while others surged because they had land, capital, and infrastructure. Containerization did not just improve shipping. It reorganized geography. Trade began to favor places that could absorb the new logic of scale and speed. Entire coastlines, industrial zones, and transport corridors changed because the steel box demanded a different kind of port. Specialized container ships followed. These vessels were designed to carry standardized boxes quickly, efficiently, and at extraordinary scale. And the impact did not stop at the port gate. Manufacturers could rethink factory locations. Retailers could rethink inventory, and importers could widen their supplier networks. The container reduced what economists call friction. It made distance cheaper. And when distance becomes cheaper, the map changes. Factories can move farther away, sourcing can spread across continents, and production can be split across multiple countries. A product could now be designed in one country, assembled in another, packed in a third, and sold almost everywhere. That is one reason the shipping container became one of the physical foundations of globalization. This is the point where the story gets even bigger. Because the container is not just a box on a ship, it is one visible piece of a hidden operating system. Behind it is an enormous choreography of standards, schedules, terminals, cranes, customs systems, rail timetables, truck networks, insurance rules, documentation, and capacity planning. The reason the container matters is that it compresses complexity. Thousands of products can be treated as one movable unit. One sealed unit becomes one slot on a truck. One slot becomes one position in a stack. One stack becomes part of a yard plan. And that yard plan becomes part of a ship loading sequence. That sequence then becomes part of a global timetable. This is why the shipping container feels almost digital. It takes the messines of physical trade and turns it into modular units that can be counted, routed, tracked, and optimized. It brought a new logic to movement. And like many powerful systems, it had side effects. Some were celebrated, and others were painful. Shipping became cheaper, faster, and more reliable. Cargo damage and theft were reduced, and massive scale became possible. But dock labor was transformed. In many places, that meant fewer workers were needed on the waterfront. Communities built around older cargo systems lost their purpose. Containerization also helped make offshoring and globally distributed manufacturing far more practical. That changed labor markets well beyond the ports themselves. The steel box solved one problem by rearranging many others. That is why the best ObjectLore stories are never just about invention. They are about what an invention forces the rest of society to become. Today, the shipping container feels almost permanent, but it is really a triumph of standardization. It is a reminder that civilization is often built not only by flashy breakthroughs, but by agreements. Shared dimensions, shared fittings, shared handling systems, and shared expectations. A box is only revolutionary when the entire world agrees to treat it the same way. That is what made the shipping container powerful. It did not flash like the jet engine. It did not glow like the microchip, and it did not roar like the automobile. It quietly made global trade scalable. And by doing that, it changed what modern life could be. Your supermarket shelves depend on it. Your online orders depend on it. Your appliances depend on it. And your electronics depend on it. So do your spare parts, your furniture, and countless objects you never think about. All of it depends on the idea that cargo should not be touched more than necessary. It should be sealed, counted, lifted, routed, and moved. That is the worldview the shipping container introduced. Even today, the scale is difficult to comprehend. Hundreds of millions of containers move through the global economy, forming the backbone of modern supply chains. And that may be the strangest part of all. One of the most important inventions in modern history is something most people barely notice. You will probably see one again soon. On a highway, at a rail yard, at a port, or stacked in the distance behind a fence. And you will barely look at it. But without that steel box, the modern world would be slower, more expensive, less connected, and almost unrecognizable. You already know the object, but now you know the story.